1/3 of couples don't talk about finances until after marriage. This is resulting in absolute car crashes up and down the country. Because you see folks, 42% of marriages in the UK end in divorce, and Muslims are no better. And the single biggest reason given for divorces is money issues. So here are the 6 key questions that you need to be asking any future spouse, or if you're already married, your current spouse, if you want to keep hold of them. The first and really important question that's really open-ended and will get people talking is ask them, what are your long-term and short-term financial goals? Notice how I put the long-term and short-term on it, because you want them to be thinking about both the immediate but also 10, 20, 30 years down the line. The way that you ask these questions is also really important. You can't just go out and, the second question you ask is, okay, your name is Nusayba, you're a dentist. What are your long-term and short-term financial goals? You can't land it like that. You need to land it as part of a wider discourse. But this question will help you unlock things like how this person actually thinks about money. What is important to them about money? Have they even thought about money? And that's not a good or a bad thing. That is just a thing that is important for you to understand, and how your relationship as a whole will play out. Because often what ends up happening in relationships is one person is a little bit more in charge of the finances and the other person is a little bit less in charge. And so doing this conversation, if both of you don't really want to be in charge of finances, will be a potential, orange flag. The other thing that this will give you is a real sense of your match financially with this other person. If, for example, they say, look, my long-term financial goal is to buy Burj Al Arab, right? And they are currently working in a newsagent's, that tells you something quite important, right? If on the other hand, they say, actually, I want to be a bit of a digital nomad. I don't really want to own a house. I'm kind of okay with just, seeing how life goes. Again, that tells you something, and it tells you, does that actually align with what I want as someone who wants to live in a semi-detached house in the middle of Cumbria? It's important to get a sense of all these things ahead of time. And I'm not an advocate at all, by the way, of going into granular detail on all this stuff. I think high-level questioning and getting a general sense is the right approach here. The second question you should ask is, do you have any debts? And what is your general attitude towards debt? Because debt is something that can cause a huge amount of friction, a huge amount of stress in a relationship and in a marriage. And so it's really important to get up clear ahead of time if someone is actually under crippling amounts of debt already, and this is going to be something that you're going to have to deal with after marriage, or if someone doesn't have any debt at all, but they have some very interesting views, shall we say, about certain types of debt. So get that on the table and clear so that you guys can have a frank conversation about it ahead of time. Question 3, you have to ask either yourself or through family members and others in the conversation, what is the income of the spouse that you are marrying? And sometimes it might be really obvious. For example, in my case, my wife was a trainee doctor. It's public knowledge what doctors get paid at that early stage. Or if your spouse is on a graduate scheme on a particular company, again, this stuff is public knowledge, so you don't necessarily have to ask that. If, on the other hand, their job doesn't have publicly available data around it, then I think it is fair to ask that question, particularly if you have an expectation as a spouse that they would need to perhaps support you. You need to be able to understand if that's even a goer. The fourth question is, ask yourself first, what are my non-negotiables? And then ask your spouse, what are your non-negotiables? It could be things like Islamic mortgages versus conventional mortgages. Where does this person land? It could be things like working in a bank or finance, or working in a shop that sells alcohol, all of that income aspect of things as well. It could be anything, but it's important if you have non-negotiables to put those out onto the table quickly, because it's a non-negotiable for a reason, right? You don't want to get married, or you don't want to get deep into a relationship before something like that crops up. The fifth question is a practical one. Ask your spouse, how do we want to think about our mutual finances and who is going to pay for what, and how you're going to balance that amongst each other? If, for example, you have the particular view that the male, the husband, should be supporting their spouse's finances and expenses, then get that clear ahead of time and figure out if that is even possible. And if not possible, then how much the wife would need to contribute into your family's financial pot. And that links nicely to our sixth and final question, which is asking your spouse, how will we save or how will we spend? Ask them about joint bank accounts, accounts versus single bank accounts, whether or not your spouse, your wife, for example, will have her own separate finances going on, whether or not you will be both saving together or separately, who will own the house that you ultimately buy, how will you both contribute into that, what about if one of the spouses wants to take a career break for having kids, for example, how will that work, will you be able to even sustain yourself financially, what is your approach and attitude towards social security benefits, do you want to claim that or not, how are you going to think about that, whether or not either of you have ambitions to go into entrepreneurship and the additional risk and possibly additional reward that may come with that, and if the other spouse is happy and open to that idea at some point. All of these are important questions to get out onto the table. So there we are, folks, 6 key questions to ask your spouse. Please do note though that I am not advocating a few things. I'm not advocating asking your potential spouse or your existing spouse endless questions till the entire rishta or the entire potential marriage breaks down. You don't want to commit the cardinal sin in rishtas, which is over-analysis leading to paralysis. Don't do that. Keep it pretty high level. The second thing that I am not advocating for is to be really granular and pernickety about certain things, certain red lines, because the reality is that often red lines are not actually red lines for most people, and people can compromise on pretty much everything. However, be pragmatic, and if there are key things that you absolutely must clarify, then I think you should do that. But the general gist that I want you to take away is ask a few financial questions so that the mood music within that conversation with your potential spouse or your existing spouse has an element of the finances embedded within it, so you have a sense of that aspect of your potential spouse or your current spouse's thinking around this very important aspect of human life. If you'd like us to dig deeper into any of these points, into any of these particular issues that we have raised, then please do let us know in the comments below, and please do give this video a like. Always really appreciate that. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.